Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the MAP Forum's annual meeting for 2020. I am NJTPA Executive Director Mary Amin, and I hope everyone's well and safe, and I thank you for joining us today. We are pleased to host this year's annual meeting of the MAP Forum. But before we get started, let's go over some GoToWebinar housekeeping notes. You might notice that all participants are muted. This is intentional to minimize background noise and other distractions that might come up during the presentations. And also because we have so many people on the meeting today, we're expecting north of 250 people. We're asking that you please use the chat box to ask questions of our panelists, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. Staff will monitor and go through these questions in the order that they came in. Given the current ongoing public health emergency, we focused today's agenda on related issues that are of concern to us as we start to orient our thinking for a post-pandemic world. For example, our regional issues spotlight is going to look at the future of work in our mega region. Our expert speakers will address critical topics such as what our offices would look like, the future of commuting, and other emerging trends such as vaccine distribution and resiliency, among others. We'll also get a look at what goes into the long-range socioeconomic and demographic forecasts that are so important to our work and to the work of our partner agencies. And finally, since so many MAP Forum members, including the NJTPA, are currently hard at work on long-range transportation plans, we'll do a lightning round to help us keep ourselves updated and our collaborative efforts going strong. I know we're all excited to get started, so thank you again for participating today. You'll note that the speaker bios are listed in the handout section. We've got so much content today that we figured you can look at their bios separately, as well as an agenda that's in the handout section. So let's start the meeting with a roll call of the MAP Forum members. And just for the roll call, we are going to unmute all the attendees. So if you're not participating in the roll call, please make sure that you're on mute so that we can minimize background noise. So first up, the Connecticut Metropolitan Council of Governments.
Yes, Matt Fulda here, Executive Director. Thank you, Mary.
Thanks. The Capital Region Council of Governments.
Lyle Ray, Executive Director, present.
Good morning. Lehigh Valley Regional Planning Commission. Becky, are you with us? Okay, we'll move on. Lower Connecticut River Valley Council of Governments.
Yes, I'm here. Sam Gold from Rivercog.
Hi, Sam. Naugatuck Valley Council of Governments.
Mark Nielsen, Assistant Director, Director of Planning.
Good morning, Mark. NIMPIC.
Hi, Mary. Jerry Bogas, Assistant Director, and Deb.
Deb Nelson. She might be on mute.
Okay.
Present. Thanks.
But we know you're there. North Jersey. Oh,
Deb Nelson's here. Sorry about that. I lost the connection.
Okay. Good morning, Deb. North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority is myself, Mary Amin, and a number of staff folks who are also serving as organizers and support. So we're well represented. Orange County Transportation Council. Julie? I thought Julie Richmond might be here, but she might be on mute.
Okay, I'm here now.
Oh, good morning, Julie.
I'm sorry, I was on mute. I'm the one that ruined it. Yes.
No.
Julie Richmond here from Orange County Transportation Council, Deputy Commissioner of Planning and Director of the NPO.
Welcome. South Central Regional Council of Governments.
Yes, good morning. Carl Amento, Executive Director. And we have one of our planners, Jim.
Tim Wright, I'm here too.
Great, thank you. And last but not least, Western Connecticut Council of Governments.
Thank you for saving the West for last. Francis Pickering, Executive Director, West Connecticut Council of Governments.
Okay, thank you, Francis. Welcome. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all. Now we're going to
Hi,
move
one
in.
more.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Hi. Good morning, Mary. This is Jennifer Fogliano. I'm having an issue getting on to GoToWebinar, but I've called in.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you. So we're now going to move into our main presentation for today's meeting. The first segment is regional issues. Our regional issue, which is the future of work, and we're going to. I'm going to turn the program over now to Oliver Schopper and Wendy Andrew Dole from Gensler, who will talk about the future of the office. And after that, before I turn the meeting over, or the session over, following that will be Con Osbey from C2 Smart Center at the Tandon School of Engineering at NYU, who's going to talk about commutation. So I'm going to turn it over to Oliver Schopper at this time. Welcome.
Mute.
Okay. No, I'm there. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for having us. We'll be brief with this presentation to give you an insight on the future of work and the impacts that the pandemic has and the recent experience that we're making. And Wendy will kick it off in the beginning. You're also still on mute, Wendy.
There we go. I was muted by the
Okay.
organizer, so I had no control. Apologies, everyone. Thank you. Welcome. We're going to dive right in. So Gensler, as you know, is one of the largest architecture firms in the world. We are impacting the people experience at an incredible rate. 200,000 Gensler designs every day impact people around the world. So just for some quick context, that's 10 times the metropolitan area. And we're very rooted in research. So we just wanted to give you a quick background on that. But we're really here today to talk about what has been going on in the last 8-9 months. We've been talking to our clients across all industries. We've had surveys deployed so we can understand from the broader public, and we've engaged over 67,000 of our clients so we really can understand what's on their mind and where they might be thinking as they move into the future. But it's been a really interesting time. As much as this pandemic has been challenging for all of us on a personal, organizational, and agency level, it's also been a great time to pivot and think about how we use this opportunity to accelerate things we otherwise may have not had that opportunity to do in the past because time was, a friend of ours. So things we've gained in the last few months, we don't have to commute as much, but things we've lost on the same side is a lot of us really miss that commute time. I know I like to listen to the radio or, my podcasts during that commutation. And we've also had more time with family. But as you all know, we're joining today virtually. That could be problematic when you have family running around and pets running across keyboards. So the reality is this has been challenging, but it also has been a real opportunity to shift. Oliver?
Yes, so we thought it would be helpful if we cast a slightly wider net for the first couple of minutes. One of the things that we've been doing and trying to understand drivers are for the change of how we work and as a matter of fact, how we live as well, was a series of what we call city pulse surveys. And we went to, in the beginning, to 4 cities: Singapore, New York, San Francisco, and London, to ask a series of questions to just get a sentiment for how people deal with the experience of the pandemic and how that impacts their daily work pattern and life pattern. And we was twice so far, and we will continue to do this, and we will actually expand it to a number of second second-tier cities in the United States, because we've seen a lot of interesting insights. One of those, for example, you see on the screen that residents in New York Metro compared to those international cities fared actually quite well in living through the pandemic. You know, with the different a series of different challenges that people deal with. On the next slide, this connects to the question, of course, whether or not the city and urban dense environments have a future. And you'll probably heard about the discussion whether or not the move to the suburbs is now sort of that second big wave that is coming. In our opinion, we can certainly say that the city is not dead, but there will be movements, changes, relocations, and also differences in how we use buildings. Thing from sort of the future of office buildings in relation to the question that we are discussing today and how we work. All of these things are still ahead of us. We have not seen clear trends really come out of those experiences, but we have a few conclusions that we can draw today. Next slide. Two questions that I just want to highlight here is that asking New Yorkers what is most important to you. First of all, interesting to see that this sort of triptych of affordability, safety from crime, and convenience has been going to the top in all four cities that we looked at. But certainly, for us, that second level of insight is who actually responds in what way. In terms of the differences between baby boomers, Gen Xers, millennials, and the Gen Z, in terms of how convenience is perceived, how, for example, in this case, highlighted for New York City, the desire for private outdoor space has come higher up, and other things. On the next slide, we had asked the question of what would you do to, or what would you avoid when the economy reopens? And certainly this was a question asked when New York City and the New York metro area was in lockdown. But one thing that we took away from there is that people are actually quite comfortable to go back to the office, but certainly in different forms and certainly in different in a different work week, let's say. But just from the point of view of sentiment, there's certainly still a bit of hesitance to use mass transit. So it's certainly an issue to focus on in the near future. And then on the next slide, this of course sets a series of questions, and the biggest one is, of course, what we want to discuss today, and this is, how we will work in the future. And we're looking at sort of many different drivers, both from a demographics point of view as well as from sort of the larger urban context point of view. And the ones that are highlighted here are the ones that we're focusing currently on. But we're trying to again, create the larger context around this question because, as I said at the beginning, the clear trends have not shown yet. And we're observing and we're advising our clients in terms of how to plan for the next form of office. But questions like the future of the central business district are paramount. Questions about investment in public infrastructure and public transportation are paramount. And also kind of a rethinking of the neighborhoods that we live in. The idea of the 20-minute neighborhood has become a hot topic. How can you work near home and go about your daily life within walking or short bicycle commute distances from the place where you live?
So how does that impact the office of the future or the workplace of the future? So we took a quick look in talking to all of our clients and started to identify some key themes that are really starting to form where this is going forward. We have a workplace survey that was issued at the beginning of the pandemic, work from home, and we did it again late summer, early fall, just to see how things had changed. We've gotten pretty good at working from home for a lot of us. Collaboration can still happen, People can still connect with teams. And we know from our data, 52% of US workers would prefer some type of hybrid model for some of the reasons mentioned earlier. Those gains that you get, not having to commute perhaps, or not having to travel, not having to spend time doing things like that. However, we also know that if you take these two numbers and combine them, 81% want to be in the office at some capacity, whether it's full-time down to just a couple days. So there is a place for the workplace, the office environment going forward. The question then remains, how does it change to make that high value for all of the folks coming back? One of the things that we looked at across all the industries and all the sectors is how that might also change based on the businesses and what they're doing. So companies like sciences and consumer goods have a higher desire to be in the office right now because they're providing product or doing a business that is getting to the community and public immediately. While some of the more knowledge workers in office focus intensive environments can more successfully perhaps work at home. Technology, management, and finance we're seeing more respondents be comfortable working from home or having more of that variation. So what does that mean when we talk about design and environment? So some themes emerged. And I'm going to run through them real quickly and share a few more data bites associated with that. 74% of the respondents miss people the most about workplace and the office. So we know that when people do come back, office has to be the new social connector. People want to see their colleagues, they want to meet with their clients again, they want to engage with community, they want that sense of belonging and group. So that is going to be critical. And how we look at that from a hospitality standpoint, service, is going to be key. We also know that there's a real desire to connect with company culture. And so workplace or the environment people come back to has to draw on experience. It has to be distinct, and it has to separate that organization, that agency, that company as a differentiator for their people. It's a way to connect, but it's also a way to find purpose to what the organization is doing, their mission statement and their values. And, you know, we thought over the last few years, amenity space would be dead. And we were so wrong. People really are looking to, again, come back together, not just to be together, but also to learn and be an environment that's stimulating and also draws community in. So there's cross-sector engagement and there's cross-collaboration between larger aspects of a business. So amenity space has to be destination space, but also has to be multi-purpose and very dynamic. A lot of digital engagement, but analog as well. And we also know that wellness is at top of mind for everyone. This is really important, particularly now with the pandemic and that consideration of space, outdoor space, distance. And people actually ranked wellness or outdoor space as in the top 5 of amenities most desired. So this is something that's going to be critical going forward, bridging that outdoors to indoors. And then what we know about office space in general, flexibility is going to be paramount so that growth and contraction can happen very fluidly. And so fitting out a space with very fixed solution is probably not the way going forward. And as we're coming into wrapping up here, you know, activating the streetscapes. So what it means to engage the community by opening your front doors, bringing folks in, but also bringing your brand and your culture outside too. Those lines between your organization and what happens right outside in your neighborhood and your community are really going to start to blur. Oliver?
Yes, and I think what this leaves us is with what we call an architecture of optimism, and it really is driven by this tremendous experience of positive change in the light of a pandemic, obviously, but with experiences that we did not think we would make. So for us, we accelerated innovation happening in many different places where it was expected that adoption of new technologies or adoption, for example, things like telemedicine would be a lot longer out than the current experience has demonstrated to us. So it's in a sense a reset moment, and we are currently with kind of the our research hard at work to make sure that we sort of seize the moment, because we see this as a tremendous opportunity to rethink the way we've done business, rethink the way we designed our offices, rethink to a certain degree, rethink the way we think about urban policy, transportation policy. Because there's also in these experiences that we all have been making a certain acceptance of new ideas that required more convincing, let's say, and more demonstration in the past. So for us, it's a tremendous moment in time, and I believe we will take questions after the next presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I mean, a few things up here on the screen that you can look up online at gensler.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver and Wendy. And we will accept questions in the chat box, but we will address them after our panelists conclude. And so with that, I want to welcome Khan Osbey to talk about commutation.
All right, good. I hope you can see my screen. I'm gonna maximize.
Yeah, there we go. And just make it bigger.
Good.
Thank you.
All right. So I'm Khan Osbey. I'm a professor at NYU, New York University, and this is joint presentation that I prepared with Jingying Gao, my ex-PhD student, now senior research associate, and there are a bunch of students, PhD students, Abi and Fan, and also full-time workers from the center. So this is joint work that I'm going to talk about. So our center, for those of you, so there are 200 people, so I couldn't not put like one slide about the center. This is a university transportation center funded by US DOT, and we are a consortium of several universities in addition to NYU. Rutgers is our senior member, City College of New York, University of Texas El Paso, and University of Washington. And our main goal is basically to work on the big cities, urban areas, and see how we can kind of contribute to operations and planning of the cities. So when COVID came on, we felt this is not an opportunity, but this is our duty basically to understand the effect of COVID on the mobility, on transportation. By the way, I would like to thank Mary and Jerry for inviting me to this panel. So thank you very much. So our so our goal, as I said, is to understand what's happening to the cities, and we focused in New York City. I don't have time to talk about what we did with Seattle because University of Washington is our partner. So here I'm going to talk more about New York, and then the center has a goal of being a kind of a cyber physical testbed for different ideas. And when this kind of disruption happens, we feel we can learn a lot from this, not only for COVID, but for probably in terms of other problems in the future. So so I didn't choose this title. I think NJTPA sent me this, and so I was thinking, like, what do I say? Okay, what is the future? It's a like big question. And then I was listening on the radio, so I thought about I heard this. So a student, during the exam, the TA asked Einstein. He says like. He's panicking. He says, these are the same questions as last year's questions. Like, what do we do, professor? And then he says, yeah, but this year the answers are different. So really, I mean, this is where we are. I mean, probably we're dealing with similar questions that we dealt for the last 30, 40 years, maybe 100 years, but maybe the answers are different. So don't take anything that I say for granted. The answers might change next year. So what we have done quickly when COVID happened was to basically see what kind of data we have, because this is really important. We need to understand what's going on, and then we looked at publicly available data sources, and we built a dashboard which is available at this link. You can go and take a look at it. And to our surprise, we found out that New York City has a lot of data, and actually it allowed us to understand the effect of COVID over time since February, and we keep adding new data to this dashboard. As I said, most of this data is publicly available, so we are doing basically combining different data sources into one dashboard database. We also generate our own data. So if you see here at the right bottom, we use in New York City DOT's traffic cameras. We grab the feed, and then we process this using AI to understand the pedestrian densities and vehicle densities. And this is the data that doesn't exist, but we generate this data and we make it available. Okay, so where we are. So I mean, the previous presentation talked about it, probably heard many other presentations. So when COVID happened, and when during April, May, everything went down. I mean, drastically. And probably that's one of the things, again, I don't want to say opportunity, but this is one of the experiments. Probably hopefully you will not be able to replicate another 100 years, So the subway ridership went down drastically. The speeds went up, because the car traffic went down. The demand for taxis went down again drastically, and we saw this almost stopping of most of the transportation at a point where we haven't seen for many years, or maybe never. So, and then we continued to collect this data I showed you. We also have now weighing motion sensors on BQE, part of the work that we've been doing with Rutgers and with City DOT. We also saw, this is the bottom of my screen, we saw during that April-May period, number of trucks going down almost 30 to 40%. So that kind of freight traffic also was impacted. Now, when we come back to October, and keep in mind, we continue to populate this database, and then we try to find new data continuously. So still, I mean, the subway demand is down, the bus demand, so mass transit demand is down. Travel times are going up, and then the truck traffic went up. Actually on those places where we measure, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But one thing that we have seen, the citywide trips went up dramatically, almost 100%. So we see that people are using alternative modes of transportation. Okay. So in addition to that, like Gensler did, we said, we want to also ask people. I mean, we are observing drastic changes in transportation. What we would also like to know what people are thinking and what they're doing at the more microscopic level. And thanks to Jerry, we talked to Nimtech also, that he helped us to reach out, the New Yorkers through their channels. Also, we use the online survey. And one of the things that we really wanted to know, in addition to knowing what's happening to the whole population, we would like to know what's happening to people with disabilities and also elderly populations. So you'll see we focused first on not a nationwide, citywide type of thing, like everybody without making a preference. But in phase 2 of our survey, we also focused on the New York City residents who are over 60 years old, also having having a disability. So we really want to understand, when you have this kind of disruption, so-called like a more vulnerable populations, how they're affected. And as you saw, actually we got very good response. I think we are one of the few centers, research centers, that have been able to do this kind of survey, understand what's going on. So we asked, typical questions about demographics, travel time, mode access, what happened before and after the pandemic in terms of mode choice, and some open-ended questions. And then, luckily, although this is a online survey, so the design is not as strict as like a regular paper survey. We have a good distribution of all age groups, and as you see for New York, and I'm now talking about New York data, there are more than 60% people, they say they can do their job from home. There's some people saying like around 30%, there are possibilities to work from home, and there's like around 10% they're saying that they have to go to work. And then when you look at the before the pandemic, almost everybody went to work at least once a week. A lot of people, 70% of the people went to work every day. They mainly in New York City, people took subway, metro, they walked or they biked. These are the three top modes. And then again, they used mass transit in a very kind of high levels. But after the stay at home and the pandemic effects, you see this usage of subway and metro becoming very low. So there's like a real shift. Not surprising, but we wanted to hear that from people. We see that from the aggregate data, but now we see that from the disaggregated survey data. And then people started walking, bike sharing, and using private car. So walking and bike sharing for transportation engineering planner, it's good. Use of private car is kind of alarming. And if you look at the after reopening, you see like almost 50% increase in the use of private car. So this is some kind of overall description of what happened before after. As you see, just look at the top one, the subway usage went down drastically. Bus, same thing. There's more people walking. There's more people biking. So not surprising, but the survey kind of supports the data that we see at the aggregate. We also asked questions about like what they cared before, people in New York City cared before and after the pandemic. So there are three types of people that we focused on. General New York City residents. So before the pandemic, they really cared about reliability and trip duration. And then after the pandemic, again, it's expected they cared more about health and safety for their travel practices. People with disabilities in New York City, before they cared reliability and safety, and it didn't change much, after so they still cared about their safety and their health. Low-income residents, before they cared reliability and price. After there's a shift more to price, the cost of travel. We also ask questions about deliveries, and then you see, during the stay home, there's a lot of deliveries. People are getting deliveries at home. Of course, not every day, but a couple of times a week. So that's also a trend, like increasing deliveries. So for the freight data, as I promised you a couple of slides ago, we have this vein motion data on the left. So we are actually getting every truck, and then we're looking at their weights and we're counting them. During the March-May period, truck traffic went down quite a lot. But then during the June-September, it kind of went back to normal. There's some change in trends, and it becomes a little bit lower in the starting bound direction, but it's almost back to normal. And if you look at the table on the right, this is like comparison of April to June, and this data is not our data, it's from Streetlight, and this is estimation, so the accuracy of that I'm not so sure, but it kind of gives an idea that during the March-April period, I mean, the truck traffic was really down compared to previous months, but then now it's slowly becoming normal during June, and we didn't look at the latest data, but I heard some presentations that the truck traffic went back to normal. So again, we see an increase in bike usage in New York City, and we asked, like, again, 3 types of people, overall, all the New York City respondents, respondents with disabilities and low income, and it looks like you know, the low income residents did not really shift to bike that much. You know, the shift is overall there's a big shift, so for shared bike or buying a bike, but we see less of a movement for low income households. So this is, I'm going fast, and I can make these presentations available so you can take a look at it. So then again, I said our focus is people with disabilities, and then they reported that actually this was a surprise. They had to 77% of them, they visited their doctor or some kind of a health center once a week, compared to 23% of the overall New York City respondents. So that means that there is a need for mobility for people with disabilities, and also they had lower access to these subway or bike sharing than compared to other populations. So for elderly, it is basically I mean, obviously they didn't buy new bikes or didn't use city bike. We didn't see that trend. Probably that's expected. And then they most of the people who are above 60 that we interviewed or not interviewed, we did the surveys, they are either retired or unemployed, so they don't need to commute as much as the regular population, but there's a big change in the way they run their errands. 80% found it difficult to see the family and friends, and 90% they find it difficult, more challenging to you know, go places like they did before. We also focused on women, because we know the women population are affected in more than the rest of the population, and then we saw that, and actually 38% of the women reported having less time for themselves after the stay-at-home orders. For men, it's 22%. So we know that transportation affects unequally women, and also this is you know, work from Wagner. It's called pink tax, and why Wagner really coined, I guess, some of these studies. So there's additional burden on women when you have this disruptions to the transportation system. So the challenges and concerns, basically, these are the things that we found. So people have to walk longer distances because they try to avoid bus or subway. They are worried about people not wearing masks or practicing social distancing. And then they are also experiencing long lines, waiting lines, and so on outside the stores. So their major concerns, this is not necessarily related to transportation, but obviously transportation is affected, health and safety, contracting the virus, and people not maintaining social distance again. Among the disabled people, the biggest concern that we heard, number one, is not being able to access certain traditional transportation modes, not being able to access their caregiver, and then not being able to see the doctor. All of them are very important, and I think this is kind of a lesson for us to learn how we can get ready in the future when there's a similar level of disruption. So these are some of the things that we think that are important to consider. So we have to increase more our attention to people with accessibility needs. This is really important. So we shouldn't be just thinking about the overall population, because certain parts of the population are affected more. We have to provide alternative modes, for example, for, again, people with special needs. We need to think about the accessibility on home deliveries. We also need to think more about neighborhoods with low household income, because they are more affected than the rest of the population. And the elderly population, this is one thing that came up in the surveys, that there's more need not only for mobility, but also for safe open spaces they have easy access to. So I'm going to talk about some ideas very quickly. So what can we do? So the question is commute or not to commute. We heard from the previous presentation that some people still want to commute. They want to go to work, and this is some new trend. You know, like Paris wants to have this 15-minute city, but you know, every location, especially in this metropolitan area, is not New York, is not Paris. So which city are we talking about? So according to the city, this idea of the 15-minute city is different. And do we really mean a 15-minute city? Because I live in Princeton, it's a 15-minute city. But do we really talk about commuting? So we need to really think about that more carefully. So how do we do that? Do we need a new infrastructure? So I couldn't help myself and quote this passage from one of my favorite books. So the conversation starts with saying, what do you mean? Why is it got to be built? He said, it's a bypass. You have got to build the bypasses. And then there's a definition of bypasses, and telling that people they need bypasses to go from point A to B and then point B to A. And the guy who's going to lose his house because the bypass has to be built, he's saying that I wish that all people were out there where the hell they wanted to be. This is a book called Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and this is really, I mean, the starting of the book. So do we really want to build infrastructure and disrupt the environment and do all of that? I'm not so sure. So is there a new approach? I think the new approach, what we learned during the COVID, is that we need to really identify problems fast, develop and then implement solutions even faster. So Professor Levinson, I was reading a book that he wrote just very recently. He talks about urban operators as well as urban planners. And then he defines that as really a kind of new, maybe, you know, type of people who can use the data, identify the existence of a problem, and then solve that in a fast way. So don't wait like a 15, 20 years. And we saw that with something like COVID, we don't have time to wait. You know, we have to solve these problems quickly, especially when the impact is really, really high. So to do that, our center, for example, we have something called Urban Data Observatory. So it's part of the way of getting ready. You know, you build a database of all the data that's available, put it in a format it can be used so that people can basically access that data, understand what happens, and even do some you know, analysis. The other thing is that build like a more capable, more dynamic models, like the Maxim model that we built for New York City. It's an agent-based model. It's data-driven. It uses all the data that I showed you. And actually, we have a new paper. We showed that it can be recalibrated in a matter of months, not years, to reflect the changes due to the COVID and then run new scenarios. So you need people who can deal with this kind of new data and new machine learning models, new simulation models, and then generate solutions quite fast. There are also new and emerging technologies that we need to think about. Autonomous vehicles, not only for personal travel, but freight. I put some examples of that. So for COVID, for example, these things can avoid personal contact, maybe more sanitary. And also we need to think about new, more efficient operations like AI-based, data-driven real-time control, multimodal congestion pricing. So just to wrap it up, we really think also about kind of new way of planning. So this is actually not so new. Martin Wax talked about this accessibility-based planning. So not just focusing on travel time and congestion, but accessibility, because during COVID, we learned that accessibility is really important. You know, people being able to go to their doctor, to their supermarket. So we need to think about this kind of planning. And then when we do that, we need to think about access and equity, access of the needs of the aging population, pressure on traditional transit services, pressure on local streets because now there are more deliveries, long-term sustainability and resilience on our transportation system, and then maybe use all of that to get ready for future emergencies. So just to finish, so we have to understand that we are still in the middle of COVID-19. So I think it's still early to make, to say that this is how it is going to be solved. So we shouldn't be hasty. So we shouldn't make drastic decisions in a hurry. So, for example, transit is still very important. So we need to support transit and subway and continue to work to make our people to move not only with personal cars but also with transit. We also need to think about major social technological changes like autonomous vehicles, e-vehicles, increased remote work, and so on. And in closing, I'll just quote something that I like from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So it says, remember in the book, if you read the book, the planet Earth was destroyed to open a galactic hyperspatial express route to later discover that a new type of spaceship was built that did not require the use of the galactic hyperspatial express route. So, so in a hurry, they just destroyed the planet Earth, and they found out that they didn't need to do that. So we shouldn't destroy what we know it works, subway, transit, bus service, and so on. Try to do our best to improve those, and then get ready for future emergencies and problems like COVID or hurricanes and so on, in a way that we build on our previous experience. So I'm going to stop here, and
thank you very much, Khan, and thank you to our other speakers as well, Oliver and Wendy. And I know we're running a few minutes behind, but Ted, can you tell us whether there are any questions in the chat box?
Yeah, sure, Mary. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah, we have a few questions, so I'll just try to move as quickly as possible. I'll try to go in order they were received. First question: are there plans to update the air filtering systems on buses and commuter trains?
I'm not sure whether there's anybody on this panel that is equipped to answer that, but I know it's a question that's come up. But if any of our panelists want to take a stab at that, sure. Yeah, maybe one or two other questions, Ted?
Sure, a question for Gensler. If workers and employers are focused on more convenience and ability to be outdoors, that might suggest decreased competitive advantage of the New York metro area as a prime office location, which relied on density as a key advantage. Are you seeing evidence of employers rethinking location choice in light of potential post-COVID priorities?
Sure. I mean, I could jump in. We are seeing building owners and landlords reposition buildings in the Manhattan area, leveraging the setbacks in the buildings for outdoor space. So that is one kind of interim solution that's starting to come to light. And Oliver, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, we actually have clients in suburban New Jersey and Pennsylvania locations that have asked us to change course in planning to provide for what they would call the office campus of the future that embraces open space solutions. Despite the fact that we're in the Northeast and that we're possibly going into a pretty harsh winter, but the ask is there. We have not seen in the context of COVID any kind of major company relocation efforts to, if that's how you pose the question in terms of like environments that are more conducive to outdoor work. I remember that this is certainly one of many drivers, and the access to talent and the overall business environment is going to be still paramount. And I think the New York, New Jersey metro area as a global business location will remain as it is, and we are working on solutions to kind of deal with the desire for open space and the appropriate solutions to deal with our climate.
Okay, maybe Ted, we have time for maybe one more question.
All right, let's see what we've got here. There's a question about the survey of 60% of respondents say they can work from home. What are the demographics of those surveyed? Do we have any more elaboration on that?
Sure. We actually looked across all generations, from millennial or Gen X to baby boomer. I don't have the actual breakdown right now, but it was pretty evenly distributed. And we have found that the millennials, believe it or not, and the younger generations are the ones having the most difficult time working from home. Senior leadership is more likely to, within an organization, have an easier time working from home because they have a house, most likely with an office set up already, the technology, they're probably not in a sharing situation that the younger generation of workforce is in. And so that is also a subset of data that we could share. Is available on our Gensler.com website under our Research and Institute tab.
Yeah, and maybe to add to this, one aspect is, as when you just said, we thought the younger population is more tech savvy and ease much better into a remote working setup. But we also realized that it's the younger generation that defines themselves as in terms of making progress in a professional career much more through the presence in an office in a professional environment, whereas our generation, we kind of have a handle on sort of on the idea of what professional progress means, and we can do this remotely. So I think those were the quite interesting insights that we didn't expect in the beginning.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, thank you again. And I know Con has said that he would make his presentation available. I'm guessing that the Gensler folks will also make their PowerPoints available. And if there is time at the end of the meeting, we can revisit the chat box and look again. But there is some time pressure here to move on. So I will thank everyone on this panel, and I hope you can stay for the rest of this annual meeting. But at this time, we're going to move on to the next session of today's meeting, which is to look at emerging trends. And in this session, we're going to have a few presentations. Deb Nelson and Tina will introduce Tina to talk about socioeconomic projections and forecasting, and Ann Strauss-Weeder will then talk about some of the logistics around planning for vaccine distribution and other current freight mobility issues. And then Jennifer Fogliano from NJTPA will talk about an emerging working group that the MAP Forum is in the process of developing to address topics of resiliency. So again, I'm going to turn it over to Deb for introductions to Tina, and then we will again take questions in the chat box. And your agenda shows this segment ending at 11:15. We're never going to be able to get all this great content done in just 15 minutes. So we will allow it till at least 11:30, and then we'll catch up later in the meeting with the lightning rounds and open discussion, etc. So with that, I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to turn my camera off, and I'm going to turn it over to Deb and Tina. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you. So I'm Deb Nelson. I'm an assistant director at the New York Metropolitan Transportation Council. And it's my pleasure to introduce Tina Lund, who is a principal at Urbanomics. Tina has been with Urbanomics for 24 years. And as I said, she's a principal there. I have had the pleasure of working with Tina for the past 2 years on NIMTIC's socioeconomic demographic forecast with a horizon year of 2055. And during the time that we were developing the forecast, COVID hit, and we had to kind of regroup to determine how to address COVID in our forecasts, in our long-term forecasts. And so Tina had done some research and provided us with information and some best practices. She presented it to the 28-member forecasting working group. The forecast covers 31 counties, so we had quite a large working group, and we thought it'd be good to hear a bit of about what Tina had presented. We wanted to share that information, and so we asked Tina to join us today to give some insights. So take it away, Tina.
Okay, great. Thank you, Deb. And can everybody share my screen? Because it's not coming up online. Or can everyone see my screen?
I can see it, yep.
You can
Great.
see.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. This is totally interesting, sorry. All right, so what we're gonna take a look at today, as Deb said, we're taking a look at what we did for the NIMTIC SED forecast and kind of view the context of that. Then we're going to go over the impacts on the forecast, the initial data we had, what economists were saying nationally at the time, and what other agencies and MPOs were doing. And then we also I'll give an overview of our options and ultimate decisions. So in terms of context, so we were working on the update of the 2050 forecast with the 2017 base year to get out to the 2055 long range forecast year. This 2-year process began in January of 2019, and we had a target adoption date of August 2020. And the next set of forecasts will be prepared in about 5 years. So what you're about to see is the special COVID-19 forecast working group meeting that was held in May of 2020, because by the end of April, or by March and April, we were pretty committed to the forecast we had. We were really at the point of fine-tuning when the shutdown happened. So we needed to step back, regroup, and decide with the forecast working group on how to move forward. So the first thing we did is we looked at the data we had at the moment and how it would affect, in particular, employment. So what you see here is a comparison of unemployment claims in March of 2020 compared to the historical regional growth we had seen from 2010 to 2017. And for the New York State NIMTIC counties, there were 241,000 roughly unemployment claims just in March alone, which was about 1/3 of the growth that had taken place between 2010 and 2017. And you can see the various effects within the sub-regions. In southwestern Connecticut, which was the majority of the NIMTIC, 3 NIMTIC counties, there were 41,000 jobless claims, almost entirely eliminating the employment growth that had taken place in the past 7 years. And in New Jersey, the entire state, there were more than 200,000 unemployment claims in that 1 month, which eliminated all of the New Jersey NIMTIC county growth in a 7-year period. So despite the fact that 2020 is a forecast year, and our base year was 2017, we felt with this serious reduction in employment, we needed to make some adjustment to the forecast to reflect what was going on. And updating things a little bit, you can still see the difference in unemployment rates between October 2019 and October 2020. Rates mostly doubled in each area except for New York City, where the unemployment rate is triple what it was a year ago. So the consensus among economists of the time, obviously we know that sectors are affected at varying degrees, and because of this, New York City is particularly hard hit because of the leisure and hospitality losses. There were also too many unknowns, especially only 2 months into the shutdown, to make long-term forecast adjustments with any great degree of accuracy. For starters, we had too few data points. As we saw earlier, there's a lot of great work being done by Gensler and C2 Smart Center in terms of tracking what's going on. But with 2 months of data, there just wasn't enough to fill the models to make a good forecast. Again, there's also the unknown of when, to what, and to what extent the region will reopen. There were plans in March that this was going to be over by summer. Obviously, that's not the case. And also there are questions about how fast affected industries will rebound. So there are definite, obviously, short-term impacts that we needed to address, but the economy is expected to rebound in the long term. And we got to that conclusion based on insights from other economic recovery. Post 9/11, there was about a lag in regional employment growth and development of roughly 5 years. After the 2007 recession, employment returned at different rates according to firm size. The larger the firm, the quicker the firm rebounded. And according to County Business Patterns of 2017, 3/4 of NIMTIC regions firms have fewer than 10 employees. So the comeback would be on the longer term basis, about 10 years. However, regardless of this distribution, recovery did occur after 2007 within the 5 to 10 short-term forecast period. And then we went further afield, and thankfully, The Economist came out with a great feature on the University of Groningen, Netherlands study, which tracks economic recovery for countries with events causing GDP loss of greater than 10%. And their historical data goes back to 1870. So in terms of the GDP threshold, COVID-19's impact models project losses to regional GDP of up to 17.5%, and that was at the time. What the historical data show is that the average 5-year recovery period is what's expected to return to pre-event GDP. So that's actually a pretty quick bounce back. However, there have been certain instances where recovery can take longer than 10 years. And along with employment, there's also the issue of population. So mortality being one of the first things we looked at, especially given the incredibly high death rates in the first few months. So what you see here is the information we had at the time was February 1st to April 2nd. There were just over 23,000 COVID deaths in the region, which was 30.4% of all deaths in the region during that time frame. In the intervening years, COVID deaths have increased, but to only, oops, sorry for the tick in that. Sorry, brief office interruption. No cats or dogs, but sometimes coworkers stop by. Things happen. So between April 3rd and November 28th, there were an additional 23,000 deaths from COVID-19, whereas deaths from all causes were 116,000. But that's actually a lower share of total deaths at 20%. So over time, 24% of all deaths have been COVID-related in the region. So what are the potential population forecast implications? Until there's widespread availability of vaccine, mortality rates will obviously be higher than previously seen. And current estimates for that vaccine for relatively widespread distribution in the United States are May next year. There's also the issue of potential shifts from urban centers to smaller towns because population has a distrust of proximity right now. And employment, we've had a large-scale trial of working remotely that's been largely successful. Even though not everyone loves it, it's possible. So obviously there will be implications for what can happen in the future in terms of a distance from a office center. So what other agencies are doing? In terms of employment forecasts, U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, considers COVID-19 a cyclical fluctuation, not a structural change. So BLS is not adjusting their 10-year forecasts. New York State's Department of Labor, the new 10-year employment projections were prepared this summer using data through the end of 2019. And at this time, no no change in methodology was anticipated. Other MPOs, the Bay Area MTC, they were examining the short-term impacts 2020 and 2025 using a very industry-specific model. But their long-term forecasts from 2030 to 2050 were expected to be unaffected. And other MPOs were more focused on modeling revenue implications in the short term, while like NIMTIC exploring options for future forecasts. Other non-MPO agencies, the New York State Office of Budget, their preliminary impact analysis projected recovery to 2019 GDP levels by third quarter of 2023. But that assumed a third quarter 2020 reopening of the state and no additional waves of infection. Obviously, that is not the case. We are certainly not reopened. So their update is a projected loss of $15.5 billion in state revenues per year through 2024. So that's a $60 billion cumulative loss over the next 5 years. New York City Department of City Planning's demographics forecasting, population dislocation resulting from COVID may be a temporary phenomenon. And right now it seems to be more anecdotal than real in terms of data. So given the fluidity of the situation, they were not changing their projections in any way, shape, or form. So our options for the NIMTIC forecast were to let the employment forecast stand as they were. The models are based on long-term drivers that include cyclical downturns, and current forecasts show lower levels of daily job growth than historic QCEW data, which included several recessions. The other option we had was to follow the post 9/11 and 2007 experience and lag employment growth by 5 years in order to be responsive in the near term. And the ultimate decision was kind of a hybrid. We eliminated employment growth from 2015 to 2020, 2020 being a forecast year, and assumed a rebound to forecasted levels by 2030. Population, because it's largely driven by labor-induced migration, and it follows employment by a flattening in the near term and continued growth to meet labor demand in the outgoing years. So thank you very much. And as Con mentioned, next year, the answers to the questions are going to be different. So as more data is gathered, as more agencies and official sources collect information, the next round of forecasts will be driven by data points that are more reflective of what's happening once that data are available. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tina. And we're gonna move on now to Ann Strauss-Weeder to talk about freight and the supply chain.
Okay, so let's see if we can see my screen. Can people see my screen, the presentation, the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay. I am just seeing it is, just one moment. Let me get to it. Good morning, everyone. The presentation that I'm making today is a very condensed summary of a freight briefing paper that we've produced on the pandemic and its longer-term implications for the supply chain. That paper is under review within NJTPA, and we'll make it available once that's completed. And it is also being factored into our long-range transportation plan. So first of all, let me start with some terminology that has been emerging in conversations about the pandemic and in broader discussions of resiliency and disruptive events. First of all, the term functional disruption has emerged, so that there is less separation between an event that has been caused by nature or by people. And then in terms of the toolbox, how we prepare and how we respond immediately to a disruptive event, the 3 C's, coordinate, collaborate, and communicate. And then in terms of what happens after a disruptive event has occurred, we now talk about the 3 R's in terms of phases. The initial reaction, the retooling, the analysis, the interim, and then renewing as we move into a changed context and understand the longer term trends. We have a lot of people today with us, so going very briefly on what was the pandemic in terms of a supply chain disruption. And it was very much, oops, are we seeing the screen?
Yes.
And I can see your screen, but it's not advancing.
Are you on, do you see a K?
No, this is
No.
Melissa. You can see your title slide.
Okay. Tell you what, let's try sharing the screen again.
Sure. Hold on one sec.
Okay, can you now see a K on the screen?
Hold on. Try again.
Yeah. Can you see a K now?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. So talking about COVID as a supply chain disruption, it was very much a very abrupt change in demand event where there were vast increases in the demand for personal protective equipment, cleaning supplies, household products, food and beverages, and a very sharp decrease in what restaurants and offices and in-store retail chains needed. It was not an infrastructure event. No physical infrastructure went offline. However, and this is critical, everyone working in that infrastructure, everyone working in the movement of goods was essential, is essential, and their health and well-being needed to be taken into account. So the immediate reaction, what do we do when this event had occurred? Now, to be clear, as early as February, 94% of the top companies were already experiencing supply chain events or incidences because China had gone offline. And even as early as February, the Council on Port Performance was noting that they were going to have to look at big changes occurring in the movement of goods through the Port of New York and New Jersey. So even back then, we knew things were happening. And to give you some idea of some of the changing situations going on, because goods were not being produced overseas, as an example, in terms of international container sailings, vessel calls were canceled. They just said, we're not moving the vessel. So in June of this past year, 25 vessel calls to the Port of New York and New Jersey were canceled, and 19 were canceled. So we're talking about not only production facilities being offline, but disruptions in the transportation of goods that had to be managed. Now, again, even back in February, the Council on Port Performance, which is a consortium of public and private organizations focused on optimizing movement through the Port of New York and New Jersey, recognized that as the pandemic ebbed, there would be a surge in activity. Most critically, it was keeping the workforce safe and healthy. And it was also very clear from the very beginning of the pandemic how critical information systems were, not just that we're using them today, but it's how we talk to our customers, how we talk to our suppliers, how we know what was going on. And all of that became a control tower in the movement of goods. And again, in terms of collaborate, coordinate, and communicate, it's using existing public-private teams such as the Council on Port Performance, or in New Jersey, creating a food supply chain, or the MAP Forum becoming involved in helping making sure that truck parking facilities were online. It's also identifying that range of residential and business needs, for example, in food distribution. Remembering that not only are people going to the stores or getting food at home, but ensuring that people that are in food recipient programs could get what they needed. So now moving quickly into the reboot stage. We've gotten past the initial situation. It is a time when everyone starts reevaluating. What are my customer needs? How about my suppliers? Did they give us what we needed? Do we need a deeper bench? Our production facilities, could they pivot? Could they not pivot? How about our distribution facilities? It's not so easy to shift from a warehouse that serves brick and mortar stores to an e-commerce fulfillment center. That's a whole different type of operation. How about our transportation systems? What did we do there? For example, XPO, one of the largest trucking operations, noted that a lot of goods on long distance got shifted to rail. How about those information systems? How could we bolster them in terms of monitoring this quick pivoting and seeing what was necessary? And again, looking at those changing freight flows. And the chart I have on here is the monthly volume of containers coming through the Port of New York and New Jersey in terms of TEUs, or 20-foot equivalent units. And you'll see that there was a downturn, as I noted, in June and July. But then August and September were absolute record months, more containers than ever coming through the port. So how do we get those containers out to the warehouses, ensure enough chassis, make sure the movement flows very easily, and everyone has been working on that. Similarly, in truck movements, there's some areas where there were shortages of truck capacity, others where trucks weren't needed as much. Rail capacity, do I have enough double stack container platforms coming into the port to get the goods out to the Midwest? And all along that way, making sure that the workforce stays healthy and setting up all new procedures at these operations. So what comes out of the reboot? And first of all, I want to point out that the public sector does not have a monopoly on acronyms. So I want to introduce you today to the term BOPIS, and we've all been doing it. That's buying online and picking up in stores. Because in reviewing in that reboot, everything that's happening, that abrupt increase in demand, it was a mass increase in e-commerce and BOPIS. And you will hear the term BOPIS used quite a bit as we move forward. To give you some idea of just the vast increase in e-commerce and buying online, picking up in stores or curbside, second quarter of 2020, Walmart had a 97% increase in e-commerce and BOPUS, and Target, or Target to some people, went up 195%. Third quarter of this year, 79% increase at Walmart, 155% increase in Target. It's very, very clear that e-commerce and BOPUS are here to stay. And then there was a lot of analysis. We started getting things in a BOPUS manner from grocery stores, either delivered to us at home, or we picked it up in the store, or we picked it up at the curb. And this accelerated by at least 3 years the penetration of this approach to retail in the marketplace. McKinsey did an analysis of what people expect in the future, and at least 56% of households expect to use BOPUS for their food in the future. And indeed, in August of 2020, the growth in e-commerce and BOPUS use for grocery was 475%. So this is one of the context changers going on. Now we can talk a lot about the vaccine, and I know we're running short on time, so during Q&A I can talk about what's been going on now in distribution. But considerations started way back in March, knowing that at some point vaccines would be produced, had to be distributed, and people needed to be inoculated. And one of the things we talk about in that reboot stage of looking at suppliers and facilities and distribution really comes out when we talk about the vaccines. Now, it's pretty clear that we did not have the capacity domestically to produce vaccine. One of the items with the pandemic, it's a worldwide event, and every nation is trying to take care of its people. We did not have the domestic capacity to produce all the vaccines we needed. In fact, BARDA, on behalf of the federal government, put several $1 billion of grants to reserve production capability for vaccines. But it's not just the vaccine itself. We found out during the pandemic that in terms of domestic production, we did not have enough glass vials to transport the vaccine, or the needles or the syringes that needed to be there. So when we talk about reshoring or building domestic capacity, before the pandemic, a lot of people said, well, you know, we really should look at pharma, but pharma became a huge item. And I want to list here some of those investments because they're a microcosm of the kind of analysis of what's going on with suppliers and production. First of all, the large investments being made in those vials and the glass tubing and the needles and syringes, but it's more than what is being produced now, but it's what's potentially needed in the future, and looking at that from some of the lessons learned. For example, with the glass vials, they can break and transport, and a vial can have anywhere from one element of the vaccine or multiple doses of the vaccine. So, for example, Corning received grants from the federal government to create layers of glass that are more durable during transport. And another company received money to advance development of vials that were combinations of glass and plastic laminate, again, to increase durability. Also, in terms of pharmaceutical production and looking at production ability, a lot of pharmaceutical production is done in batches. So if we're going to increase capacity for the vaccine now and into the future, there's a move towards what is the better way of manufacturing to be able to pivot more. And so I've noted one of the many grants that was given to advance continuous manufacturing. So as we add capacity in the US, it's not what was, but more moving towards a more efficient, say, continuous manufacturing. Now, there are other commodities that are looking at increasing domestic capacity or diversifying production locations, and that really did start with the terrible disaster in Fukushima in 2011. And again, I would be happy to talk more about what's been happening on the current movement of vaccine during Q&A. But moving forward on some of these emerging trends, so we know that there's a shift towards having more inventory on hand. Not just because of the disruptions we saw with the suppliers, with some of the transportation, but also because when you move to an e-commerce and a BOPIS type environment, you need to have more on hand to serve your customers. If you don't have it, they're going to go someplace else. Certainly that increase in information technologies, not just for connecting as we are today, but different ways of mining the information, pivoting, monitoring, all the changes occurring more rapidly and making things happen. We had workforce shortages prior to the pandemic. They became more acute during the pandemic. We're going to have them coming out of the pandemic. It's also an opportunity with so many people out of work, as Tina noted, to use this as an opportunity to help pivot people into jobs and career opportunities in transportation, distribution, and logistics, and that has been happening within our region. The Council on Poor Performance is a workforce development implementation team, 40 plus different organizations across New York and New Jersey, all working together on education and so forth to really adapt. The state of New Jersey during the early days of COVID set up a jobs portal. I also do want to talk about automation. There are really two types of automation. One is automation that replaces job. Second is automation that changes the nature of the job. And there's a tremendous increase in interest in automation and deployment of it because we have to look at social distancing within facilities, as well as what to do if we do have a workforce shortage. So moving on to conclude, really thinking through the implications for our four-state region. We do know that additional capacity for production will occur within the U.S., not just in pharmaceutical alone, but in others. New Jersey has had strength in pharmaceutical before. And not only that, in South Jersey, it's some of the best silica deposits and a historic strength in that kind of glass production. So there are opportunities from an economic development standpoint to pursue those new production locations because we are such a center of consumer activity and companies want to be closer to their consumers. For all the reasons I've just discussed, we have a white-hot industrial market, and I'm sure Becky can attest to the white-hot market out in Lehigh Valley. At our December 14th Freight Initiatives Committee meeting, we'll have an update from Prologis and CBRE on what's happening there, but we can anticipate a growing need for industrial space as we pivot towards e-commerce and BOPIS. And as I said, all those workforce needs. And I have a photo here of the Amazon facility in Bordentown. You can see all the parking for associates. We have to talk about accessibility to these job locations. It's not just training, but particularly when we talk about transportation needs for everyone. It's the accessibility from where people live to where they work. So we have to look at those options for people. And we always have to consider how we optimize all the modes in our multimodal freight system. Everything has come into play in the movement of containers from the port, the truck side and the rail side. And as I noted earlier, XPO noted a shift from truck to rail as people try to move goods and a shortage of truck drivers. So we have to continue to optimize it. Looking forward, we know that there's new technologies coming on board. There's a picture of the drone there that was deployed by CVS and UPS in Florida to serve the villages, a vulnerable population of older citizens in Florida. But we have to think as regions about those information automation technologies and what needs to be put in place in terms of infrastructure to support it. So I've gone over very, very quickly a lot of information. We will have that all in much more detail in the report that will be out shortly, and I'll be glad to handle your questions during the Q&A. So at that point, thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Ann. And our last speaker for this panel is Jennifer Fogliano from the NJTPA. And Jennifer and Megan Sloan, we're very grateful to them because they are leading a relatively new working group at the MAP Forum. And we have asked them to make a short presentation on the types of emergency resiliency initiatives that are emerging for the agencies in the MAP Forum region. So I will turn the proceedings over to Jennifer and Megan. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mary. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes, thank you.
Well, thanks for the introduction. So this, as you said, will be brief. No PowerPoint slide here. Just would like to tell you about our working group and what we have in store. So the Resiliency Working Group first met this summer, and over the course of several meetings, we have discussed potential focus areas and potential goals for 2021. The two main areas of focus for 2021 will be sharing climate projection data and examining the intersection of resilience and public health. The MOU for coordination of transportation planning activities in the multi-state New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, metropolitan regions states an agreement to perform voluntary coordination, cooperation, and consultation in a number of ways, including to communicate and exchange information such as planning products, data and forecasting, analysis and tools for the transportation planning process, as well as regional studies through informal and ongoing communication, such as through this type of working group. It also states that the parties shall cooperate in efforts toward achieving, where possible, general consistency of these planning products, analysis, and tools through informal communication and document exchange. When thinking about resiliency, climate projections can inform regional, state, and local planning efforts and are important for not only the work of our individual organizations, but ideally also our collective work. An expected deliverable for this working group will be data sharing, such as through uploads of climate projections and possibly other tools and data to the hub. The Rutgers Center for Advanced Infrastructure and Transportation, also known as CATE, may be able to assist this group given their focus on data collection, data management, modeling, predictions, resiliency planning and policy, and decision making. Kate works to help identify projections and mitigation measures for the future. Megan Sloan of the Connecticut Metropolitan Council of Governments and co-chair for the working group, and I are currently reaching out to the center to see what specific tools or data are available, how they might be used, and what may be particularly useful for this working group. The group's vision for 2021 includes expanding our understanding of resiliency and public health. COVID has brought a greater awareness of the increasing risk to public health issues for environmental justice communities, and public health as it relates to transportation. Also, public health is increasingly under stress due to the number of climate-related events each year. In fact, it's been said that the cause of the current pandemic is rooted in climate change, and so the connection is clear that we must become a more resilient society to protect public health. The transportation system has contributed to reduced air quality in many environmental justice communities. The health problems associated with poor air quality, as well as extreme weather events that continue to increase as climate changes, often has a disproportionate impact on EJ communities. In terms of the current pandemic that we struggle to contain, it is well understood that poor air quality in EJ communities contributes to the high rates of asthma and makes people more vulnerable to COVID. We welcome suggestions of tools, data, reports, and other resources to assist us in achieving the goals of this work. If there is a particular colleague or someone in your larger network who has expertise in either of these focus areas, and you think a conversation with them would help us with this effort, please feel free to contact either Megan or myself with those subject matter experts, and we'd be happy to have a conversation with them. Thank you.
Thank you. Megan, anything you want to add? Or I know you had some excitement today, so all good? Okay. All righty. Thank you all. And at this point, I'm going to request that we change things up a little bit in the agenda. We just had some excellent presentations by Deb and Tina and Ann and Jennifer and Megan. And rather than go straight to the Q&A for this segment, I'm going to propose that we move right into the lightning round, and then after that we'll do the we'll take a break for the public participation, and then when we're done with that, we'll use whatever available time to answer any other questions that might have come up, or as many as we can that come up in the chat box. That way we give our presenters a chance to present, we give the public a chance to speak, and then we can address as many of the chat box questions as possible. So if that is acceptable, and I'm hoping it is, I'm going to turn the proceedings over to Jerry Bogas from NIMTIC, who will conduct the lightning round on the long-range plans. So take it away, Jerry.
Great. I hope you can hear me.
You can.
Great. So yes, I will try to get us back on time also. It's striking how much we've heard today about the impacts of the pandemic across the board. Not surprising, but very striking, certainly, when we hear the presentations we heard today. So planners in particular are challenged by this, because when you're looking forward into the future and trying to make plans, not having confidence about what might be happening in the future, not having confidence in your own forecasting abilities in some cases, certainly makes planning that much more difficult. So the issue of long-range planning has been a topic of discussion amongst the MAP Forum members in our organizational discussions. And we all thought it would be a good idea to begin to take stock of our required long-range planning. So each of our constituent organizations, be they MPOs or COGs, is required to produce regional transportation plans on a certain cycle. It's either 4 or 5 years, depending on whether or not you're in a transportation management area. And these plans are important blueprints, both for the medium term and the long term, in terms of how federal dollars are going to be used in our particular planning areas, as well as other policy and programmatic implications. So given the fact that we are required to do these cycles and that we're now facing a great deal of uncertainty, the thought was that taking stock of where we are is important at this point. Given the fact that we have less time than we thought, I am going to try to consolidate this a bit. I did a scan of the 10 organizations that are members of the MAP Forum, and it turns out that 8 of the 10 had just adopted their most recent long-range transportation plans in 2019. So they're all very recent plans. 2 of the member organizations, NIMTIC and NJTPA, are on a different cycle and had adopted their current plans in 2017, and we're looking to adopt new plans in 2021. I want to give a little bit of focus to those 2 cycles, because essentially the pandemic is happening right in the middle of our plan update cycles. And I want to first call on Lois Goldman, who is directing the planning process or the development of the plan for NJTPA, and ask her to talk a little bit about the impacts on TPA's plans, and then I'll say a few words about what's happening on the NIMTIC plan. So, Lois?
Thank you. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
You're great. You're
Okay,
great.
great. Thank you. So thank you. And I just want to say that many things that I was thinking of touching on have already been covered much better by these previous speakers. This has just been a really informative session. I appreciate that very much. So as Jerry said, NJTPA's plan, which is called Plan 2050, People Transportation Opportunity, is scheduled to be adopted in the fall of 2021. Our schedule is the same despite the pandemic, although many of our activities are different, particularly our coordination and outreach, which has been all virtual. So I just want to take about a minute to talk about what we're doing to develop the plan, and then I'll turn to sort of how the COVID pandemic is influencing how we're thinking about the plan. So far we've published 2 background papers, one on technology and one on active transportation, which are both on our websites. And there will be one on climate change coming out soon. We've met with most of our neighboring MPOs and planning partners, or will be meeting with you shortly to do our coordination. And I just want to give a shout out to NIMTIC and Jerry and his staff, because they've been particularly helpful with our financial element, and we also discussed outreach and compared notes on that. So like I said, our public outreach has been all virtual. We've done 6 public meetings so far, one of which was entirely in Spanish. We've also had outreach with our Up Next North Jersey group, which is our young adults advisory group. And we've talked to them about things such as transit and bike and ped needs and things like that. We also have a website and an online survey. In addition, we're having 3 what we're calling TPA Tuesday events. One was in October on adapting to change, and there's one next Tuesday on equity and transportation, and then a 3rd one will be probably in January. So just to kind of pivot for a minute to more of the content of the plan, I feel like we're in a very good place right now, because there's so much good work that's been done in our region that we can draw on, such as the RPA 4th Regional Plan, the work that New York City DOT has, New York City Planning has done related to the interconnectedness of our regions and commuting, the work in New Jersey, the New Jersey Energy Plan, the New Jersey Transit Strategic Plan, as well as freight forecasting work that we've done at NJTPA, and the work that the MAP Forum has also done on things like truck parking. So some of the big themes for the plan are sustainability and climate change, maintaining infrastructure and adapting it to technology, equity, economic recovery, and sustainability. So, as well as some of the big picture issues such as Gateway and how are we all connected. So, moving on to how COVID has impacted us, it's pretty clear that we have to think about this plan differently in terms of how we travel, how we use land, how and where work gets done, economic resiliency, and equity. So, I'm not going to go over the figures, but I do want to just point out that a couple of things about New Jersey. One is that small businesses are a big driver of New Jersey's economy, and they make up about 20% of our employment. And I've read that up to a third of these small businesses are floundering or have closed in New Jersey. So that is very sobering. In New York City, it's about 21%. And when you think about equity, many of these small businesses are owned by women and people of color. The other thing that I've also read is that unemployment is disproportionately impacting service workers and low-income workers, and that half of these claimants have a high school diploma or less. So that's another really sobering thought. On the other side of the employment picture, of course, there was about 30 to 35% of people working from home in New Jersey at the peak. And that's going to persist. And I think that's something we've all been talking about. And I really appreciate what the folks from Gensler were talking about in their survey work, because I think that was really informative. So a couple of big ideas that we're thinking about. One is that we are one region and we are interconnected, and thinking regionally, more regionally about rail, gateway, fare integration, economic recovery, and along those lines that we've learned to work together for the common good. With social distancing and things like that. And so what else can we work on? Such as changing safety culture and addressing inequity. Are these more things that we could be collaborating on in the future? As I've mentioned, to keep a focus on equity throughout our plan, a sharper focus because of what this pandemic has shown us about the deep inequities in our region and in our country. Also that we found that we can get people out of their cars without changing land use, and that people really want to do more walking and biking, and they want to use their streets differently. So how can our plan support that? People also, in terms of the economy, people are going to live, the idea of this 15-minute city. It could be really great for our downtowns. How do we use this downtown space? How do we use office space differently? These what they call stranded assets, which were before the pandemic already suffering from some very high vacancy rates. Also, is there going to be more of a desire to produce more goods and services locally? And at the same time, how do our cities not just get hollowed out by telework and these trends? So those are kind of the big things that we've been thinking about. Also thinking, if there is a large infrastructure spending bill, how would that play out? What does the lack of traffic, the lower traffic levels mean for our construction schedules and our opportunities to do construction? And also thinking about our transit agencies and their continuing need for additional funding. And what's that mean for their long-term capital improvement plans? And then finally, as Ann touched on, the freight needs and warehousing have really been transformed, and there's a huge uptick in warehouse space needs. So those are kind of the big things that we're thinking about. Jerry, I can turn it back to you, and I appreciate the time.
Sure, great, Lois. Thank you. And it's always good to work with you on these overarching issues. I'm not going to, Lois provided a good encapsulation of the types of things that you have to take into account at this point in time when you're developing a long-range plan in the middle of this. I would just point out a couple of things that are similar from NIMTIC's perspective. First of all, we heard about the adjustments that were made to our socioeconomic demographic forecasts from Deb and Tina. And those are important because they do ultimately affect our demand forecasts and have real impact on the planning process. Like Lois and NJTPA, our public outreach program had to be completely converted to virtual outreach through a number of modalities. That was an interesting exercise, to say the least, and we did end up bringing more people into the process through that. So there is an upside to that, and in the future, we're probably looking at some type of a hybrid approach as we go forward. And public health became an element of resiliency for us. One of our 5 proposed shared vision goals is resiliency for our planning area. And that had been focused on climate change and very much still is, but public health is now part of that resiliency discussion, and that's a significant shift. We found that we had to create a COVID caveat, though, for the entire plan, in that there's just not enough data. We've heard from other presenters today that, you know, knowing what's going to happen past next year is a crapshoot at best. So a lot of our assumptions, a lot of our trends that we're basing some of our planning on are open to that caveat, and they really don't yet accommodate what's really happening in the world, and we don't even know where that's leading. We're happy with the MapForm collaboration. That's expanded our planning, certainly, and much of our planning is affected by what happens outside of our planning area and vice versa, so that's very important. And we are looking at prospective amendments in the future. Once we have to adopt the plan on a certain schedule based on federal regulations. That'll be September of next year. Beyond that, there may be a need to make adjustments before the next plan cycle finishes, due to the reality that emerges from the pandemic. So I would just add those points to what Lois said. I do want to ask, though, since this is a lightning round, very quickly, of the organizations in Connecticut and Lehigh Valley and Orange County in New York who have adopted their plans in 2019 and therefore are very recent, are any of you considering the possibility of amendment or adjustment to the plan based on the COVID-19 pandemic at this point, or rather, are you assuming that that will be picked up in future plan cycles? You can probably just unmute yourself and weigh in on that. I'm not going to call a roll or anything like that. Anyone want to say a few words about that? Hey, Becky.
Sure. This is Julie Richmond here from OCTC. I think, consistent with everything we've heard here today, I think it would be premature for us to start thinking about making any changes before the next development cycle, because we just don't yet know the full extent of what the impacts of COVID, as well as the economic impacts and the change in the politics may bring. So for us, yes, I think we're just we've got some interim activities going on. We're sort of midpoint through our cycle, but I don't see at this point that we would be amending the LRTP as of yet.
I know we feel confident in our long-range transportation plan. It's a 4-year document, so it's going to be amended anyway, and we're going to start that work next year. So as we usually start two years in advance. What we are doing, though, is we're looking at the pandemic has obviously opened everyone's eyes to a variety of things that we didn't maybe think about before. So we're actually thinking about what data do we need and thinking about how we use and analyze our data differently so we can be teed up for a better long-range plan that then rises to the needs of the occasion as we go into that update process starting in 2022.
Matt, did you want to add anything?
I was just going to add, Jerry, I think this is Matt Fold from MetroCog. We are, as you said, we just recently endorsed our long-range transportation plan. And I'd say, much like Becky, I don't think we have any plans currently to do any interim updates, but we're certainly keeping an eye on travel demand and those sorts of indicators. And we'll very likely look to start our data analysis process in the next 1.5 years or so. Hopefully with some of this COVID pandemic issues leveling out a little bit to give us a better baseline of where we're moving into the future. And I do think, to your point, Jerry and Lois, about adding a resiliency aspect specifically to these types of stressors to our plan is something that we will be taking into account for the next update.
Thank you, Matt. Mark?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I think our plan is pretty heavy toward highway improvements and the highway infrastructure. And my guess is that, we probably won't be looking at, doing any amendments, because a lot of the projects that we've included are rehabilitation, replacement, restoration. These types of projects are going to have to be done regardless of changes in travel patterns or commuting patterns. The one concern that we may be looking at is honestly the commuter rail. As everybody knows, the Haven line moves into New York City, and 90,000, 95,000 people a day used to commute on that line, and ridership dropped by 95%. And what does that mean long term? Is that ridership going to come back in 4 or 5 years, or is this the new norm where ridership is going to be going down? And that's going to affect what we've sort of put in our plans in terms of rail infrastructure improvements. The other part of our long-range plan that I'm real concerned about is just the finances. I'm sure everybody is facing the same issue. Federal Transportation Act, federal infrastructure bills may provide a lot of money into the states, but if we can't provide the typical 20% match, we're going to be hard pressed to actually utilize the money that may be coming in. Connecticut has been pretty hard hit by changing travel patterns because we're so reliant on gas tax as the revenue source for our special transportation fund. That has gone way down, and it's going to be a real interesting legislative season coming up on how the legislature is going to approach how to make that special transportation fund more solvent in going into the future. And so that's our big concern. But as Matt said, I don't think we're going to actually be doing an amendment until a couple of 3 years. But we'll be obviously looking at these trends going forward.
Thank you, Mark. Interesting and important point about the financing, obviously. Anyone else want to offer anything from the Connecticut COGS or, well, it's actually the Connecticut COGS at this point because we heard from Becky and Julie. Okay, great. We're certainly going to have discussions about this going forward, and it's great to be in an arrangement like the map forum so that we can work with each other and learn from each other as we make assumptions going into the future. And it does have a real impact on how projects are planned and how federal money is used. So this isn't just a planning exercise, quote unquote. So appreciate everybody's thoughts on this. Mary, thank you for the time. We finished a little bit quickly, but that's fine. And I think we can get back on schedule now. So back to you, Mary.
Thank you, Jerry, and thanks to all the map forum members who gave us updates. That was an extremely helpful discussion. So what we're going to do now, and Ted, I'm just going to give you a little heads up here. We're going to move to the public participation segment of our meeting, and so what I'd like to do is ask Ted to read the list of people who signed up to speak in the order that they did sign up, and then we'll see if there's anyone else who wants to speak, and that will give us an opportunity to hear from the public, fulfill that requirement, hear what people have to say. I will ask the presenters to limit their presentations or their time at the podium, so to speak, to 3 minutes, so that we can get to everyone who does want to make a public comment. So Ted, do you have anybody? I think there are 1 or 2 folks who have signed up. So can we switch over to that roster now?
Sure, Mary, no problem. Yes, that's correct. We have 2 people signed up for public comment, Floyd Lapp and George Hicalis. So Floyd, if you're ready, I guess you can go first.
So this is Melissa, sorry, I'm not actually seeing Floyd on the call, so I'm gonna have George go. And Floyd, if you're here but not signed on under your name, please send us a message and we'll unmute you. So George, you should be able to unmute yourself now. George is on, but he has himself muted. George, can you hear us? Mary, I don't know if we want to go back to that deferred Q&A and come back to public comment, but George is not responding and Floyd does not appear to be on the call.
So let's just do one thing before we switch. Was there anyone else on the call who did not sign up to speak, but who would like to make a public comment? Keeping in mind that we will return to the general Q&A. So is there anyone else who would like to make a public comment?
Please use the chat box to let us know. Oh, we have one, Murray Bowden. Hold on one moment, Murray, and I will unmute you. Murray, are you there?
Yeah. The one thing that hasn't been addressed is global warming. It's the major issue facing the world today. Rising seas will wipe out all of the coastal cities all over the world. Your time frame needs to be compressed into weeks and months and not years. And this is the one thing that isn't being discussed anywhere. Yes, we have a vaccine coming, and yes, things will change. But unless we start to discuss the fact that we will never go back to an era of growth, that the Earth has reached the limits of its capacity for population, the airlines will never expand again. Carnival Cruises just rebuilt a ship, and in 2019 they finished it, and 2 months ago they sent it to the scrap yard to be scrapped. Theaters will never reopen. Warner Brothers went to HBO and they're releasing all of their movies online. Most of the speakers today were women. And that transition and a recognition of that segment of our population, very important. This has been the best meeting I have ever attended, and I've been to a lot. The one thing you need to do is to recognize change is in days and months and not in years. And when you talk about a projection for 2055, it's meaningless. I congratulate you on running an excellent meeting, well thought out, and it was an education for me. Thank you very much for this time to be able to speak to you. I missed the part about signing up early this morning. By the way, I'm 87 years old, and some of my remembrances are getting a little bit stale. So I apologize for the mistakes I make. Congratulations on an excellent meeting. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Murray. We really appreciate your comments. Has anyone else signed up to speak, Ted?
No one else at this time, Mary.
And were we able to locate George Icalis?
Not that I can determine.
Yeah, he's showing logged in. George, are you there? You can unmute yourself. I can't unmute you. It says you're muted.
Well, I'll tell you what. We said that we would run and end no later than 12:15. So let's use the remaining time. Ted, again, if I could impose on you, if you could check the participant or the presenter chat box as well as the public comment chat box, and maybe we can just start reviewing those, and maybe you can take a look and see. I can't see the actual chats, but maybe you can see if you can kind of mix it up a little bit and see if there are questions that are to each of our presenters if they're still on the call. So we'll just see what we can do and go till 12:15, because I know I think Murray said it very well. This is really an excellent set of presentations, and so much information has been presented, and that just raises so many more questions. So let's see what members of the audience have put in the chat, and we'll see what we can do for the next 10 minutes or so.
Ted, before we go to the general questions for the panelists, Randy Glucksman, who's an MTA board member, said he could speak to the question asked earlier about air filtration on rail cars that the panelists really couldn't address. So I'm gonna unmute Randy, because that was a question from someone in the audience, and the panelists really weren't the right people. So
thank you.
Randy, you should be able to.
Yes, I'm here. Yes, thank you very much. It was a very interesting presentation. On October the 15th, the MTA had a press conference at Grand Central Terminal where they showed on two of their M7 cars a new air filtration system, which get this, 99.9998% of airborne viruses, bacteria, and particulates, including COVID-19. So they are the first agency in North America to pilot this technology. And, you know, upon completion of the pilot program, they will roll it out to all of the other rest of the fleet. So that's a very promising thing. And of course, the Transit Authority was trying something with lights, and I don't have an answer on that. I thank you for the time to speak to you.
Thank you. Ted, any backlog of questions in the chats that you want to call out?
Yes, indeed, Mary. There's a couple in there we can get to. One of them was to NIMTIC, asking if NIMTIC is revising its forecasts to show that previously projected levels of employment and population for 2020 will now occur in 2030. So I don't know if Jerry or somebody wants to answer that from NIMTIC.
I think, as mentioned by Tina, we have adjusted our forecast so that there is a dip from 2020, and then it starts to go up in 2030. So I think, to answer your question, you know, as Tina addressed, that has been adjusted.
Okay, and then we had a question, I believe this would go to Ann Strauss-Weider. To what extent is labor taken into account with distribution, vaccine distribution? So in other words, if medical staff is overwhelmed dealing with the sick, who's going to be able to administer the vaccines?
So a lot of consideration has gone into how the vaccinations will take place. Each state provided to the federal government their own action plan for how this will go forward. So first of all, there is information on who would be vaccinated first. And the first round is really for frontline workers, essential personnel, and then the most vulnerable populations. And as you may have seen in the press, for example, Walgreens and CVS are part of that distribution chain for some of the nursing homes and so forth. So there are plans that you can download for each state to see how that's being done, and a very detailed plan that's been worked out. From the federal standpoint, they are working with McKesson, which is one of the big distributors, on having moved things through. Pfizer's doing their own, but there are plans in place to do that based on the demographics of the individuals. So I hope that answers the question.
Okay, and stick around because we had another question for you as well regarding the white hot market that you referred to in your presentation, and whether that's on the distribution side, but you also focused on potential for reshored new production. Do you have any examples of recent uptick in production spaces in the region, specifically related to any medical responses from the pandemic?
What's coming out of the pandemic now will play out in the next few years as we move production forward. But we have seen examples both within the NJTPA area, and again, Becky can certainly talk about the production facilities to the west of us, and DVRPC can talk about the ones to the south of us. Prior to the pandemic, we saw that with food and other items, production facilities are moving closer to population areas. So that was already happening here. In terms of pharma, as I mentioned, we have had a competitive strength historically in the production of these products. So we do anticipate they could come back, but those discussions clearly are underway as part of that reboot and renew situation. And hopefully we'll hear a bit more from the people at our December 14th Freight Initiatives Committee meeting. And in fact, I'm looking at Melissa, if you could please post the information for how to log on to that meeting in about a week and a half. Thank you.
Any other questions, Ted?
Are there any plans to engage large employers to use their sites as vaccination centers for their employees or maybe the general public?
In that regard, again, I'm going to defer to whatever plan the state of New Jersey, for example, has put forward on how that will be done. So I think we can all stay tuned and see how that's going to be rolled out. But to be clear, there's been careful consideration given to first the essential workers, the frontline workers, the medical personnel being inoculated, and then moving down through vulnerable populations. And it will take probably most of next year, and they're still working on vaccines for children. So again, that will be later in 2021. But I would say stay tuned. You're going to see announcements as the vaccines are authorized. And as you may have seen, it's been in the press, efforts have already been made to position the vaccines for inoculations to occur. Are you going to read a lot about how the vaccines are moving? No. With any high value pharmaceutical product, that's a security consideration. And indeed, and again, this was in the press this week, there have been cybersecurity efforts to disrupt this distribution plan. There are already efforts on fake versions of the vaccines. So a lot of security considerations are going into effect as well as we move forward. To be clear, plans for production of the vaccine, distribution of the vaccine, and actually vaccinating the population have been under discussion and been worked out since March of this year.
I'm going to jump in for a second. We had 2 questions that were from the first round of presentations that we thought we could go back to since we've got a few minutes. Con, I think this might have been from yours. If not, maybe Oliver can field it. I apologize for forgetting when this came in exactly. But the question was, for the MTA slide of October 20th travel patterns, it shows a 96% increase in city bike use from February. Do we have year-to-year comparisons for, October 2020 versus October 2019?
So there's data for city bike and also for MTA usage. So the data is available. It's not in my presentation, but we have that data. So that it's a part. I mean,
Aye. Yeah, another 5 minutes.
Oh, somebody's coming through on. Okay. All right. Thank you for that, Con. And then Oliver, I don't know if you can answer this or not, but somebody had asked a follow-up question about the demographics you were speaking about earlier. They wanted to know if not just age demographics, but also like race and income level, if there was diversity in that as well.
We asked those questions. We put questions in about income level and race and diversity. All of these questions had kind of the option of not answering them. So the information should be available. I don't have it at hand now, but I think Wendy had directed you to our research, the Research Institute website, Gensler.com, where this information should reside. I can follow up afterwards to see if I can deliver you an answer on. But we absolutely set up these questions for all of these surveys to capture that information as well.
Great. And I think, Mary, I think those are all of the questions that we had.
All right. All right. Well, if no one has any further questions, or if any of the public doesn't have any other questions, then it's probably time to bring this excellent annual meeting to a close. I do want to thank all of our presenters. To a person, it was informative, got us, at least speaking for myself, got us thinking very differently about what the role of transportation long-range planning is, and how to navigate our way through the next few months and maybe years on our way to 2050. So it's fascinating. Who'd have thunk that a year ago these would have been the topics for this year's MAP Forum annual meeting. So I thank each and every one of the presenters. I also want to extend a great deal of gratitude to the folks who organized this particular event. Melissa, Ted, Jerry, Ann Strauss-Weeder, and John Schote from NJTPA, and a number of people who reached out and made contacts, and it was really a wonderful combination of speakers and presenters, and of course I want to thank the people who participated and attended, and to all the members of the MAP Forum, without whose constant participation and input and discussion, we wouldn't really have the strength and the bandwidth to do these kinds of events. So I think that with that, I don't know that we're so formal that we need to ask for a motion, but I believe that we can announce or declare that this annual meeting has been adjourned. And I thank everyone for your participation, and I look forward to a healthier and saner 2021. So thank you all.